As mentioned previously, three parties will be officially sworn in as the government of New Zealand. Bit of an historic day, and one of the factors, no doubt, that many people considered when they cast their vote in the election, which does seem like such a long time ago now, was economic performance. Will a new government change, I suppose, things like inflation? Will it make me better off? Will I be able to afford to buy groceries? All those sorts of down-to-earth type things. But I suppose one of the issues with this thing, it's very useful to be able to blame a government or a finance minister, but not all of these factors are within the control of anybody here in New Zealand. There's other factors that influence our economic situation. Joining us on the program now is CEO of Christian Savings, Dan Mazengarb. Dan, kia ora. Nice to chat with you again.
Kia ora. Yes, it's been some time, but it's lovely to be invited back.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you very much for being here. Now, when we talk about, look, we're not talking about foreign influence on our economy, but there are things in other economies, other events that are happening in different parts of the world which do directly influence economic outcomes for us in New Zealand.
Yeah, look, I think as Kiwis, we sit there and we say, what are these events going to have an impact for me, and what is that impact? And you referenced the election as a good example of things that happen that say, is this going to hurt or hinder my own financial plan or
Yep.
my job security or my family? But I think also, we look overseas to the things further afield and we think, what sort of impact is that going to have on me if I'm going to start a business or if I'm going to change job? Is this a good time or not? There's sort of all those impossible questions to answer.
Yeah.
But I think, we do have two sort of major conflicts going on. Obviously, the war in Ukraine and now the war in Gaza. And I think for a lot of people, they'll be thinking, what sort of impact will that have on me? And by the way, another good example of that was the floods that happened last year. Some people think, oh, well, there's been some major destruction. Maybe that will boost employment because we'll have to get employed and to go clean up the mess. But it's never that sort of simple when we look at things. So, look, I think there is probably a misconception out there that war can be good for a country because of the employment situation, not the country, obviously, where the war is taking place. But I think there will be a few people out there saying, what's this going to do to my mortgage rates, my ability to buy flour, for example?
Yeah. I mean, in basic terms, uncertainty is bad for economic outcomes. Certainty is what we like. Certainly, as somebody in the financial sector, if you've got an idea about what the situation is going to be in the future, you can make better informed decisions. Is that the hub of it?
Yeah, look, certainty is a big thing, but also control of supply. So, when the Ukraine war broke out, we all noticed, a shortage of flour starting to hit some places, and a rising cost of certain goods because the Ukraine is sort of the breadbasket of Europe, and a lot of grain and food is produced out of there. So, what often happens with wars and conflicts is that it constrains the pipeline, the supply pipeline, and so we hit inflation because there's less goods coming through the same amount of demand domestically, at least, which pushes the price up. And obviously, inflation has been the biggest culprit that we've all been talking about over the last sort of 18 months, because it's the reason why our interest rates have gone up, which has been good for those who are saving and those who might have term deposits, for example, because their interest rates go up and so their returns go up. But if you've got a mortgage, then, the rising interest rates are not so good for us. So certainty does have a big part to play, but also that inflation side caused by restrained supply chains, also another big factor. And again, we saw something similar to that after the floods in New Zealand on the East Coast. Harder to buy apples or fruit that had been produced in that region. It was expensive or hard to find. So supply chain's another big thing.
And when it comes to something as complicated as inflation, it's not just a matter of saying, okay, well, the Reserve Bank, they just tweak a few knobs, or if we just reduce government spending, that will have an immediate and measurable impact on inflation. A little bit more complicated than that, to be fair, Dan.
It's proven to be quite complicated. And in the last round of sort of inflation fighting behavior, it's fair to say we're still in the midst of it, and we don't know, we can't get a real-time measure of how effective those moves have been, because there might be this delayed or lag effect as interest rates are fixed in on mortgages, etc. So it's a bit of a murky one and a bit of a messy one. I mean, I think when we talk about conflict, if we were a nation that primarily built submarines and tanks and guns and ammunition, first of all, we wouldn't be a very popular country, I suppose.
No, terrible
but
people.
Then we might say war can be good for us because we produce those goods from an economic point of view. But we're largely just a large farm with a tourist attraction in the middle of it. That's sort of our economy.
Well, it's better than previously where we were a housing market with some cheese on the side, I suppose. I think we've also been described as that as well. I suppose when it comes to inflation and interest rates and all these sorts of things, there's people saying, oh gosh, when will this end? And again, from the middle of the situation, we can't necessarily go, okay, this is where we're at on the graph and this is what it's going to do in the next 6 months. How long is a piece of string when it comes to certainly to the inflation process? Because, if it was just happening in New Zealand, maybe we could make some minor adjustments. But inflation, this is a global situation. Just about every economy in the world is affected by this, and we are part of a global economy. Yeah,
and look, that's another takeaway, is that something that if China sneezes, the whole country, the whole world catches a cold, as they say.
Exactly.
And they have had a couple of wobbles too. So, we do live in a very interconnected world, and again, that's the difficult job for the Reserve Bank, is that they can sort of tweak the knobs and the dials at our end, but they can't do much about what's going on overseas. So, the supply of goods or demand from overseas for our products, for example. So, but they do have a tough job, and I don't envy the governor. So it is a bit of a wait and see at this moment with interest rates. I mean, I think a lot of us are hoping that there will be some easing late next year, but we'll have to see if those inflation figures come down.
Now, I suppose that's the other factor, as well as security, as well as things being stable and predictable. Confidence is a big part of that as well. How confident we are as a nation, how confident business owners are to invest into wanting to grow their business. That's the other important part of the factor, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, if you're thinking of launching a new business, for example, and businesses take a bit of risk, you might not want to do that when you don't know what your borrowing costs are going to be, for example, or if people are going to be able to afford the product that you're making, because all their surplus income is now going to pay their higher mortgage. So, not to say that it is or isn't a good time to start a business, but that sense of uncertainty is certainly a barrier for new economic growth. And it's good that we've finally got a new government for the sake of certainty. We sort of know a little bit more about the road ahead now.
Like it or lump it, at least we know what's on the piece of paper, and we can go, okay, we can make decisions about what we know rather than guessing, right?
Exactly. So that's one question mark that's now taken off the table for those who are looking at sort of new ventures. But look, you can't sort of wait for the perfect environment to make a move either, because no sooner will the Gaza conflict be settled or Ukraine, and something else will happen. So It's just sort of the nature of interconnected global economy.
That's the nature of it. Now, if people are in that situation where they were looking to invest, and as you mentioned beforehand, and interest rates are pretty good, if you're in the investment market, people can find out more about what you have to offer. An organisation which is not only financially solid, but also invest into literally building the kingdom of God. ChristianSavings.co.nz for more information on that, Dan?
Yep, check out our product disclosure statement on our website and give us a call if you've got any questions. Love to see how we can help with those wanting to save, but also do good for the kingdom.
Dan, appreciate the work that you guys do. Thanks for taking the time to chat with us today.
Kia ora.